For nearly 5 decades, one question hovered silently behind the laughter. What really happened between Jimmy Walker and Esther Rolle? The world knew them as mother and son, the hilarious, high-energy J.J. Evans and the unshakable, no-nonsense Florida Evans on Good Times, a show that broke barriers and shaped black representation on television forever. But off-screen, their relationship was anything but harmonious. Behind the jokes, the ratings, the catchphrases, and the applause, there was conflict. Not scandalous, not salacious, but a deep philosophical divide. And for most of his life, Jimmy Walker never spoke in full about what really went on behind the scenes. Now, at the age of 78, Walker is finally talking, and what he reveals is far more profound than anyone expected. It's a story about fame, creative control, missed connections, and a woman who tried to make television history mean something more. Before Good Times ever aired its first episode in 1974, America was a nation in flux. The civil rights movement had shaken the foundations of the country just a decade prior. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated only 6 years earlier. The wounds of segregation were still fresh, and on television, black life was still mostly absent, or worse, filtered through white interpretation. Then came Norman Lear. Already known for creating socially conscious sitcoms like All in the Family and Maude, Lear sought to push further, this time placing a black family front and center, not as caricatures or background players, but as fully formed human beings. Good Times was born from this mission. It was a spin-off of Maude, where Esther Rolle had originated the role of Florida Evans, a wise, grounded housekeeper with dignity and backbone. Lear saw something powerful in her performance and built a show around it. But Good Times wasn't just entertainment. It was activism on a soundstage. It was a deliberate attempt to reframe black families in mainstream media, not as broken, not as criminal, but as loving, resilient, and honest. For millions of viewers, it was the first time they saw a black family living, laughing, and struggling on network television without being reduced to stereotypes. That's what Esther Rolle signed up for. And then, almost overnight, the show's focus shifted, from the family's collective story to a single breakout character, J.J. Evans, played by a young Jimmy Walker. The shift wasn't subtle. Ratings spiked as Walker's comedic performance turned into the show's centerpiece. His flamboyant delivery, exaggerated movements, and catchphrases captured America's attention. But what thrilled the audience terrified Esther Rolle. Because while everyone was laughing, she saw something else happening. The representation she had fought for, of a strong black mother, of a united family, was slipping into the background. And in its place, a version of comedy she believed was dangerously close to minstrelsy. And that's where the real story begins. Jimmy Walker's story doesn't begin on a television set or comedy stage. It begins in one of the toughest neighborhoods in America during one of its most turbulent times. Born James Carter Walker Jr. on June 25, 1947, in the South Bronx, Jimmy entered a world marked by overcrowded tenements, economic instability, and a community constantly battling neglect from the city that surrounded it. His mother, Lena, was the stabilizing force in the chaos. A hardworking nurse who rose to become head nurse at a local hospital, she anchored the family with quiet determination. His father, James Sr., was largely a ghost, more often gone than present, floating in and out of the household with no lasting foundation. That early absence would shape much of Jimmy's worldview, instilling in him a deep sense of self-reliance and emotional independence. Growing up, Walker wasn't the loud kid cracking jokes in the back of class. He was quiet, observant, and fascinated by how things worked. While other kids idolized sports stars, Jimmy was drawn to electronics and technology. That curiosity led him to Theodore Roosevelt High School and later to the RCA Technical Institute, where he studied through a government-funded program designed to give underprivileged youth a shot at skilled careers. He took full advantage, eventually landing a job as a radio engineer, a profession few would associate with the man who'd later shout "dynamite" to millions. But fate, or perhaps instinct, pulled him towards something less structured and more expressive. In the late 1960s and early 70s, Jimmy found himself drifting into New York's comedy clubs. These weren't posh venues. They were smoky, raw, and unpredictable spaces where your worth was tested one laugh at a time. His early material wasn't flashy. It was smart, observational, and rooted in the working-class world he came from. He started performing at places like the Apollo Theater, working his way into a black comedy circuit that was finally beginning to get national attention. His wit was fast, his energy unmatched, and his delivery, lean, agile, sharp, stood out. Television producers noticed. He began appearing on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In and The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, where he earned one of the most coveted prizes for a young comic: approval from Carson himself. This wasn't just a young man telling jokes, it was a technician of timing and rhythm. Someone who had studied not only the art of performance, but the mechanics of how people reacted, when to pause, when to punch, and how to let silence speak just loud enough. And then the call came. A new sitcom was casting. A family-based show centered on working-class black life. They needed someone young, funny, and magnetic to play the oldest son. Jimmy Walker was about to become J.J. Evans, and his life would never be the same. When Good Times premiered on CBS in February 1974, it wasn't just launching a new show, it was making television history. It was the first time a network sitcom centered on a two-parent black family living in a public housing project, and it offered something that had long been missing from American screens: a portrait of black life that was grounded in reality, love, and resilience. Set in a Chicago housing project, the show explored everything from unemployment to systemic racism, teen pregnancy to economic injustice, while never losing its heart or humor. It was gritty, but accessible, heavy yet hopeful. And at the center of it all stood the Evans family. James, the stern yet loving father; Florida, the no-nonsense moral anchor; and their 3 children, each reflecting a different angle of black youth in America. But then came Jimmy Walker's performance as James Jr. J.J. Evans was electric. Tall, lean, and constantly in motion, Walker brought a physicality and comedic rhythm that leapt off the screen. His delivery was lightning fast, his expressions cartoonishly precise. Every scene he entered became a magnet for attention. Viewers couldn't take their eyes off him. And that catchphrase, dynamite, originally just a throwaway line, exploded into a cultural phenomenon. It wasn't just quoted, it was shouted on playgrounds, printed on t-shirts, and parodied across late-night shows. For CBS, JJ was gold. The ratings climbed. The network leaned in. Writers began tailoring more episodes around JJ's antics. The stories, once anchored in family and social realism, gradually shifted toward comedic set pieces that gave Walker center stage. He wasn't just the comic relief, he was fast becoming the show's focal point. But behind the scenes, not everyone was celebrating. For co-stars like Esther Rolle and John Amos, the sudden spotlight on JJ's exaggerated humor felt like a betrayal of the show's original mission. They had signed on to tell real stories about real people. They had fought to show a black family with strength, structure, and intelligence. And now, week by week, they watched that vision take a back seat to one-liners and physical comedy. Jimmy Walker had become a star. But in doing so, he had also become the center of a growing storm, one that would eventually shake the show to its core. Esther Rolle didn't walk onto the set of Good Times looking for stardom. She came with a mission. By the time the show began production, she was already a respected stage actress, with decades of experience performing in off-Broadway productions and politically conscious theater. She carried herself with a quiet authority, grounded not only in craft, but in conviction. To her, Good Times wasn't just an acting job, it was a cultural responsibility. From day one, Rolle made her values known. When Norman Lear and the show's producers first approached her to reprise her role as Florida Evans, she made one condition clear: the family must include a father. She refused to participate in a show that would contribute to the already prevalent stereotype of the absent black father. Her insistence led to the creation of James Evans Sr., played by John Amos, another classically trained actor who shared her deep belief in portraying black life with authenticity and strength. Rolle viewed Good Times as a rare opportunity to do something revolutionary, present a black family not as victims, criminals, or comic relief, but as fully realized, multidimensional people. She fought for that vision in script meetings, in interviews, and sometimes in silence, refusing to deliver lines that felt out of touch, refusing to compromise the moral clarity she brought to the character of Florida. So as the series began shifting its focus, Less on family unity, more on JJ's increasingly cartoonish behavior, Rolle felt the ground shifting beneath her. She wasn't opposed to humor, but she believed it should serve the story, not overshadow it. JJ started out as a creative, imaginative young man with artistic dreams, but over time, he became a walking punchline. Loud, exaggerated, and increasingly disconnected from the show's original tone. To many viewers, JJ was hilarious. To Rolle, he represented a painful regression. She didn't scream. She didn't storm off set. Instead, she waged a quiet war of principle, pushing back in writers' rooms, demanding scripts be rewritten, refusing to show up for scenes she found disrespectful to the characters or the culture. She would often arrive on set with a marked-up script, lines crossed out, annotations scribbled in the margins, not for ego, but out of protest. A protest few outside the studio ever saw. When asked in interviews about the show's direction, she never attacked Jimmy Walker personally. But her disappointment was always there. Beneath the measured words, in the way she spoke about the importance of representation, and in her fierce defense of what she believed good times could have been. Eventually, the pressure reached a breaking point. After 4 seasons, Rolle left the show entirely, disillusioned by how far it had drifted from its original purpose. She later returned for the final season, but only after receiving assurances that the scripts would refocus on the family's core values. But by then, something essential had already been lost. And the tension between Walker's rising stardom and Rolle's quiet resistance had created an unspoken rift, one that neither of them would fully resolve while she was still alive. For years, Jimmy Walker said almost nothing. While fans speculated, cast members hinted, and journalists asked pointed questions, Walker kept his responses brief and measured. When the subject of Esther Rolle came up, he offered polite praise or redirect the conversation. If pushed, he might acknowledge creative differences or philosophical clashes, but never with bitterness or blame. Just enough to acknowledge the distance, never enough to explain it. On the surface, it seemed like professionalism, but in truth, it ran deeper than that. Walker was in a complicated position. He had become the face of the show, praised, quoted, and elevated into pop culture stardom. And yet, behind the scenes, he was surrounded by resentment. His popularity had come at a cost, even to his own castmates. Speaking openly about the growing divide between him and Esther Rolle, especially during the height of his fame, would have meant risking backlash, being labeled ungrateful, or worse, seen as dismissive of a woman who had fought to protect the integrity of the very show that made them both stars. So for decades, he said nothing, not out of disrespect, but out of discomfort, maybe even guilt. But time has a way of reshaping memories, and distance brings clarity. Now at the age of 78, with his legacy secure and the spotlight softer than it once was, Jimmy Walker is finally ready to speak, not to defend himself, but to reflect. In recent interviews, podcasts, and public appearances, his tone has shifted. He's no longer sidestepping the past, he's revisiting it. With honesty, with maturity, and most surprisingly, with humility. Esther was tough because she cared, he said in one interview. Back then, I didn't fully understand what she was trying to do. I was young, I was riding the wave, I thought making people laugh was enough, but she was fighting for something bigger. Walker now admits that he once saw Rolle's resistance as personal, as criticism of his success. But looking back, he sees it for what it was, a principled stand by a woman who understood that visibility without depth could be dangerous. She wasn't trying to dim his light, she was trying to keep the show grounded in its purpose. And that realization didn't come easy. What Walker now understands, and what he wants audiences to know, is that his silence wasn't a denial of the tension. It was a lack of readiness to face what that tension really meant. It wasn't about egos, it was about vision, about legacy, and about the painful truth that even in shared success, people can feel deeply alone. And now, decades later, he's not just speaking for himself, he's speaking to Esther Rolle, even if she can no longer hear him. In telling the truth about Esther Rolle, Jimmy Walker is also telling the truth about himself. He's acknowledging the ego, the youth, the blind spots, and ultimately the growth. It's a reminder that behind every iconic show, every beloved character are people. People with values, with visions, with scars. And sometimes it takes a lifetime to realize the depth of someone else's impact. Esther Rolle never chased fame, she chased integrity. And now, decades later, even the brightest star on Good Times recognizes that without her, the show may not have meant anything at all. She made sure Good Times lived up to its name, not just in laughs, but in legacy. If you found this story powerful, please take a moment to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. Did you grow up watching Good Times? What do you think about Walker's reflections and Rolle's fight for dignity? Be sure to subscribe for more in-depth stories about the people who shaped our cultural landscape. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep remembering the real stories behind the screen.